My name is Brianna Foster. I'm 28 years old, and while I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from emergency surgery, my sister was sitting in a chair beside me, scrolling through her phone, quietly changing the password to the business I had spent 4 years building. I didn't find out until 3 weeks later. I want to start at the beginning, because I think the way this built, slowly and almost invisibly, matters as much as the moment everything fine. I started my Instagram account, Bloom and Bramble, when I was 24. It began as nothing, a hobby account where I posted photos of floral arrangements I made for friends' events, mostly because I loved doing it and had no formal outlet for it. I was working a marketing job at the time, decent but unfulfilling, the kind of job that pays your rent and gives you absolutely nothing to look forward to on a Monday morning. The account grew slowly at first. Few hundred followers, then a few thousand, mostly through word of mouth and a handful of local wedding vendors who started tagging me in posts after I did arrangements for their events. I taught myself everything: color theory, composition, the specific lighting that makes flowers look alive instead of flat in a photograph. I spent every weekend for 2 years doing arrangements for friends of friends, often for free or barely above cost, just to build. Real growth happened when I was 26. A wedding I'd done arrangements for got picked up by a regional bridal magazine, and the feature included a credit and a link to my Instagram. Within 6 months, I'd gone from 8,000 followers to over 60,000. Brands started reaching out, flower wholesalers wanting partnerships, a vase company that sent me product in exchange for posts, eventually paid sponsorships that actually amounted to. I quit my marketing job at 27. It was terrifying and exhilarating in roughly equal measure. I turned Bloom and Bramble into an actual business, an LLC, a proper bank account, a small studio space I rented above a coffee shop downtown where I did arrangements and shot content. Within a year, the account had crossed 200,000 followers. I was doing brand partnerships that paid more in a single sponsored post than I used to make. I was teaching workshops. I had started developing a line of dried flower arrangements I was hoping to sell through my own website. It was, by any reasonable measure, a genuine success story. The kind of thing that happens to other people, not to a girl who grew up in a 3-bedroom rental in Tulsa with 2 working parents and exactly 0 connections to the floral or fashion or influencer world. My sister Megan is 3 years younger than me. We've always had a complicated relationship, close in some ways, competitive in others, the kind of sibling dynamic where love and rivalry exist tangled together so completely that it's hard to separate them. Megan struggled to find her footing in her 20s in a way I hadn't. She bounced between jobs, retail management, a brief stint trying to start her own jewelry business that never quite caught on, a period working as an assistant for a local realtor. Nothing built the way Bloom and Bramble had built for me. I tried for years to bring her into what I was doing. I hired her part-time to help with deliveries when the business started growing faster than I could manage alone. I paid her well, better than market rate for what amounted to fairly simple logistics work, because she was my sister and I wanted to share what I'd built. Eventually, she started helping with some of the administrative side too, scheduling client consultations, managing my workshop sign-ups, occasionally posting content when I was too busy to do it myself. I gave her access to the Instagram account about a year and a half ago, when the business had grown enough that I genuinely needed help managing the day-to-day social media tasks, responding to comments, scheduling posts, handling the volume of direct messages that comes with 250,000 followers. I added her as an admin through Meta Business Suite, which meant she could post, respond to messages, and manage most day-to-day functions. What she didn't have was the actual login credentials to the account itself. The account was created under my personal email, linked to my phone number for 2-factor authentication, registered as a business under my LLC. Megan had operational access, the kind any well-trusted employee might have. She did not have ownership. I want to be clear that I trusted her completely during this period. We worked well together mostly. There were moments of friction. Megan occasionally felt I didn't give her enough credit publicly for the work she did, and I'll admit there's probably truth in that complaint. I was the face of the brand, the one giving interviews, the one whose name was on the LLC. Megan's contributions, while real and valuable, existed mostly behind the scenes. I didn't fully understand how much that bothered her until much later. The hospitalization happened 8 months ago. I've been having stomach pain for about a week, the kind I kept dismissing as stress or bad takeout, until it became sharp enough one evening that I drove myself to the emergency room rather than waiting it out. It turned out to be a ruptured appendix that had progressed to peritonitis, significantly more serious than a routine appendectomy, requiring emergency surgery, and afterward, an extended hospital stay to manage the infection with Roman 4 antibiotics. The first 3 were a blur of pain medication and recovery from surgery itself. By day 4 or 5 I was more lucid, though still exhausted, still attached to Roman 4, still very much not in a state to be thinking clearly about business logistics. Megan came to visit almost every day. She brought me things from home, sat with me during the long afternoons, helped me with small tasks I couldn't manage with the Roman 4 line restricting my movement. I remember being grateful for her presence in a way that felt uncomplicated at the time, my sister, showing up for me during a frightening, vulnerable stretch of my life. I remember, too, that she spent a lot of time on her phone during those visits. I assumed she was managing the business while I couldn't responding to client messages, handling the workshop scheduled for that week that I'd asked her to cancel, the normal logistics of keeping things running while I had no reason at the time to think she was doing anything other than exactly what I'd asked. I was discharged after 9 days with instructions for an extended recovery, 6 weeks of limited activity, follow-up appointments, a slow return to anything resembling normal life. I spent the first 2 weeks at home mostly resting, occasionally checking emails and client messages from my laptop, but largely staying away from the day-to-day demands of the business, trusting that Megan was handling things in my absence the way we discussed before my surgery. It was at the start of week 3, when I finally felt strong enough to sit down and properly catch up on the account, that I discovered I couldn't log in. I assumed, at first, it was a simple error. A password I'd mistyped, a security flag from an activity, something easily resolved. I tried the password reset function through the app, expecting an email to arrive at the address I'd used to create the account 4 years earlier. No email arrived. I tried again more carefully this time, double-checking I had the right username. The reset request went through without error, which meant the system recognized the account, but no email appeared in my inbox. I felt the first real flicker of unease. I called Megan that afternoon, keeping my voice light, assuming there was a simple explanation I just hadn't thought of. Hey, weird question, did something happen with the Instagram login? I'm locked out and the password reset isn't sending to my email. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just slightly too long. Oh, she said. Yeah, I had to change some settings while you were in the hospital. There was some kind of security flag on the account, I think it got reported or something, and I had to update the recovery email to get it sorted out. Updated it to what? Another pause. My email, she said. It was just temporary to deal with the security thing. I can switch it back. I sat very still on my couch, my recovering body suddenly tense in a way my doctors had specifically warned me against. Can you switch it back now? I asked. I'm actually really busy right now, Megan said. Can we talk about this later tonight? We did not talk about it that night. Megan didn't answer my calls. By the following morning, I had moved from confusion into something closer to alarm. I want to walk through what I did next carefully, because the next several weeks involved a level of methodical documentation that I don't think I would have managed if I hadn't spent 4 years building a business and learning, the hard way, the importance of paper trails. First, I went back through every email associated with the account. I found, buried in a folder I rarely checked, a notification from Instagram about a recovery email change request, dated to my 4th day in the hospital, while I was still heavily medicated and largely unconscious for stretches of the day. The notification had gone to my old, original email address, the one technically still on file at the time of the change request, before the new email fully took over. I had simply never seen it, because I was lying in a hospital bed with a fever and Roman 4 in my arm, and absolutely no capacity to be checking obscure security notifications. Second, I pulled up the Meta Business Suite records that I, as the LLC owner, still technically had partial access to through a separate administrative login I'd set up months earlier and largely forgotten about. A login Megan apparently didn't know existed, created for tax and advertising purposes rather than day-to-day management. Through that back-end access, I could see activity logs showing that the recovery email change had been initiated from a device registered to Megan's phone number at 2:47 in the afternoon on day 4 of my hospitalization. A time I now remembered clearly, because it was during one of her visits, while I had been asleep after a round of pain medication. Third, I called Instagram's business support line, which is a frustrating and often circular process for anyone who has tried it. But I had documentation now, and documentation changes everything when you're trying to get a corporation to take your case seriously. I explained the situation in detail, the hospitalization, the timeline, the recovery email change made while I was incapacitated, the activity logs from Business Suite that showed the change. I provided medical documentation of my hospital stay, dated precisely to overlap with the security change. I provided the original LLC paperwork showing Bloom and Bramble as a registered business under my name, with the Instagram account listed as a business asset in financial documents I'd filed for a small business loan 2 years earlier. It took 11 days of back and forth with Instagram's business verification team, but eventually methodically. The account had been created under my information. The business documentation matched my name. The activity logs showed an unauthorized recovery email change initiated during a period when medical records confirmed I was hospitalized and unable to authorize any such change myself. During those 11 days, I also discovered something else, something that made the entire situation considerably more painful than a simple, opportunistic password change. I checked the account's recent post history, viewing it as a follower would since I no longer had direct access. Megan had been posting under the Bloom and Bramble name throughout those 11 days, but the content had shifted in ways that made it clear this wasn't simply maintenance of my existing brand. She'd posted several arrangements that weren't mine, work I didn't recognize, photographed in a different studio space than my own. She'd started subtly rebranding captions, referring to we and our journey, in ways that implied shared ownership rather than the assistant relationship that actually existed. She'd announced in one post about 10 days into the takeover that Bloom and Bramble would be evolving with some exciting changes coming soon, language that made my stomach drop when I read it. She wasn't just locked into the account. She was actively building a narrative where she was becoming the new face of a business I had spent 4 years creating from nothing. I confronted her directly once I had the full picture, calling her on a Thursday evening after I'd gathered everything I needed for the Instagram case. I know what you did, I said without preamble. I have the activity logs. I have the timeline. I know you changed the recovery email while I was in the hospital. There was a long silence. I was trying to help, she finally said, but her voice had lost the easy confidence from our earlier conversation. You were so out of it. I didn't know if you were even going to be okay. Someone needed to keep the business running. Keeping it running doesn't require locking me out of my own account, Megan. Keeping it running doesn't require posting work that isn't mine and implying it's a joint venture. It's not just yours, she said, and now there was an edge in her voice, something that had clearly been building for a long time. I've been working on this account for a year and a half. I respond to half the messages. I handle half the logistics. But every interview, every feature, every brand deal credits you, just you, like I don't exist. Do you know what that feels like? To build something alongside someone and watch them get all the recognition while you're invisible. I sat with that for a moment, because there was something real underneath her anger, something I had genuinely not fully reckoned with during the years she'd worked for me. I understand that you felt unrecognized, I said carefully. And I think that's a real conversation we should have had a long time ago. But Megan, the answer to feeling unrecognized is not to lock your sister out of her own business while she's in the hospital recovering from surgery. That's not a conversation. That's theft. It's not theft if I was helping run it the whole time, she said. It's theft if you change the password without my knowledge or consent and start representing yourself as a co-owner of a business that's legally, financially, and entirely registered under my name alone. She didn't have a response to that. I told her I was working with Instagram to restore my access, and that once that happened, her admin privileges on the account would be revoked. I told her I needed time to figure out what our working relationship looked like going forward, if it continued to exist at all. She hung up before I finished talking. Instagram restored my full account access on the 12th day. I changed every credential immediately, password, recovery email, two-factor authentication tied exclusively to my own phone this time. No shared access of any kind. I removed Megan's admin status from Business Suite the same afternoon. The account had lost about 3,000 followers during the period of confused, inconsistent branding, a small but real consequence of the chaos. More significantly, I'd lost trust in a part of my business I had genuinely believed was secure, a foundational assumption I had to entirely rebuild from scratch. I also had to deal with the fallout within my family, which turned out to be considerably more complicated and painful than the technical process of recovery. My mother, when she found out what had happened, was initially disbelieving, not of the facts which were thoroughly documented, but of the idea that Megan would do something so deliberate and so cruel, particularly while I was hospitalized and vulnerable. She wanted understandably to believe there was some innocent misunderstanding buried in the situation, some version of events where Megan hadn't fully grasped what she was doing. I walked her through the documentation, the act, the timeline, the posts implying co-ownership. My mother went quiet for a long time after seeing it all laid out. I don't understand how she could do this, she said finally. While you were in the hospital, while you couldn't even defend yourself. I didn't have a good answer for that, beyond what Megan had told me herself about feeling invisible, about years of resentment building beneath a working relationship that had looked functional from the outside, but had clearly been corroding from within. My father, when he learned what happened, was less generous in his interpretation. He's a practical, plain-spoken man, not given to excessive emotional nuance. And his response was simple. What Megan did was wrong, full stop, regardless of whatever underlying resentment had motivated it. He told Megan as much directly, in a conversation that apparently grew heated enough that Megan didn't speak to either of our parents for almost a month afterward. I want to be honest about where things stand with Megan now, because I think it would be dishonest to present this as a story with a clean, satisfying resolution. We are not currently speaking. It's been about 7 months since the hospitalization, almost 6 since I fully regained control of the account. Megan sent one text message about 2 months after everything settled. A brief, somewhat defensive apology that focused more on explaining her feelings of invisibility than on acknowledging the specific harm of what she'd done while I was incapacitated in a hospital bed. I responded, telling her I appreciated the gesture, but that I needed more than an explanation of her motivations. I needed a genuine accounting of what she'd done and why it was wrong regard. I haven't heard from her since. I think about this often, the strange asymmetry of our relationship now, how 4 years of genuine sisterly collaboration, of bringing her into something I'd built and trying to share both the work and the rewards, dissolved so completely over the course of 9 days when I was too sick to monitor what was happening to my own business. I've rebuilt the technical and legal infrastructure of Bloom and Bramble entirely since then. I now have a lawyer who reviews all my business documentation annually. I have a clear written employment agreement with the part-time assistant I eventually hired to replace the work Megan used to do, someone outside my family, someone whose role and compensation and credit are explicitly defined in a contract neither of us has to guess about. The account has fully recovered its follower count, and then some, currently sitting above 230,000. The business is, by every external measure, stronger than it was before the hospitalization, before the betrayal, before I learned the hard way that even the people closest to you can decide, in a moment of vulnerability and resentment, that what's yours has somehow become theirs to take. I think about Megan sometimes, in the quiet moments when I'm working alone in my studio, arranging flowers the way I taught myself to do years before any of this success existed. I think about the version of her who used to visit me in the hospital and sit by my bed, who I believed in that moment was simply showing up for her sister the way family is supposed to. I don't know if that version of her was entirely fake, or if it existed alongside the version that was simultaneously changing my recovery email on her phone while I slept through a fever in the bed beside her. I think honestly both things were probably true at once. She loved me. She showed up and she stole from me. People are rarely simple enough to be only one thing, even when the thing they did is impossible to excuse. What I know for certain is this. I built Bloom and Bramble alone from nothing, through 4 years of unpaid weekends and self-taught skill, and the kind of persistence that doesn't always look like much from the outside but adds up slowly into something real. My sisters heard about recognition, however legitimate the underlying feeling might have been, did not give her the right to take that from me, especially not while I was lying in a hospital bed unable to defend any part of it. I am 28 years old. I have a business with my name on it, finally fully secured the way it always should have been. I have a sister I am not currently speaking to, and I genuinely don't know if that will change. And I have learned, in the most painful way possible, that protecting what you build sometimes means protecting it from the people you never imagined you'd need protection from at all. There's a part of this story I haven't told yet, something that happened about 4 months after everything settled, that complicated my understanding of the whole situation in ways I'm still working through. I got a message from a woman named Dana, a vendor I'd worked with several times over the years, a floral wholesaler who supplied a significant portion of my materials. She reached out through a business account, somewhat hesitant in tone, saying she had information she thought I should have, even though she wasn't entirely sure it was her place to share it. During the 11 days I was locked out of the account, Megan had reached out to Dana directly, attempting to negotiate a new wholesale agreement under different terms that would have benefited Megan personally, structured in a way that suggested she was preparing to formally take over the supply relationship, as if she were becoming the business's new primary owner. Dana had found the request strange, particularly because Megan had implied I was stepping back from the business for health reasons, and that she would be assuming day-to-day control going forward. Dana, who had worked with me for 3 years and trusted the relationship we'd built, told Megan she'd need to confirm the change in arrangement directly with me before agreeing to any new terms. According to Dana, Megan had grown frustrated on the phone, insisting that she had full authority to negotiate on behalf of Bloom and Bramble, that I was unavailable due to my hospitalization, and that the wholesale relationship needed to be formalized quickly to avoid disruption to upcoming orders. Dana declined to proceed without my direct confirmation. She told me she'd found the whole exchange unsettling enough that she'd made a note of the date and the specifics of the conversation, mostly out of an instinct that something wasn't right, though she hadn't known the full context until I reached out to clients and vendors during my recovery process to confirm nothing had been altered in my absence. When I read Dana's message, I sat with it for a long time before responding. This wasn't just about Megan changing a password during a moment of crisis, a single impulsive decision made under some combination of genuine concern for the business and long-simmering resentment. This was evidence of a more deliberate, more calculated attempt to actually transfer ownership of relationships and infrastructure that belonged to me, while I was incapacitated and unable to intervene. I thanked Dana for telling me. I asked if she would be willing to provide a written account of the conversation if I needed it for any future documentation. She agreed without hesitation. I didn't immediately know what to do with this new information. Megan and I were already not speaking by that point. Part of me wanted to simply file it away, evidence I might never need, proof that confirmed what I already suspected about the depth of what had happened during my hospitalization. But another part of me felt a different kind of urgency. If Megan had reached out to one vendor with this kind of proposal, there was a real possibility she'd reached out to others. I needed to know the full scope of what had happened, not just for my own peace of mind, but because my entire business depended on relationships with vendors, clients, and brand partners who needed to trust that the person they were dealing with actually had the authority she claimed to have. I spent the better part of a week reaching out to every significant business relationship I had: vendors, brand partnership contacts, the venue owners I regularly worked with for events, the handful of larger clients who booked me for substantial projects months in advance. I asked each of them, carefully and without immediately revealing why I was asking, whether they'd had any unusual contact with Megan during my hospitalization period beyond the normal scope. Most of them said no, that everything had proceeded normally, that Megan had handled basic logistics exactly as expected. But 2 more contacts came back with stories similar to Dana's. A brand partnership manager at a home goods company I'd worked with twice before told me Megan had reached out asking about expanding the partnership into a longer-term ambassador role, framing herself as someone with significant creative input into the brand's direction going forward, despite having had no previous direct contact with that particular partner. The bride I'd been scheduled to work with for an upcoming wedding told me, somewhat awkwardly, that Megan had called her directly during my hospitalization, suggesting that she personally would be handling the wedding flowers instead of me, citing my health as the reason for the change, without ever actually confirming this with me first. The bride fortunately had waited to make any final decisions until she heard from me directly, which was how I found out about the conversation. By the time I'd finished gathering this information, I had a considerably more complete and more troubling picture than I'd had during the initial password recovery process. This wasn't an isolated moment of poor judgment during a stressful 9 days. This was a pattern, a series of deliberate attempts to position herself as the inheritor of a business relationship by relationship, while the actual owner of that business was lying in a hospital bed, unable to monitor or I consulted with a business attorney at this point, not because I intended to pursue legal action against my own sister, but because I needed to understand my exposure and my options if this pattern continued or escalated. The attorney reviewed everything I'd gathered: the Instagram activity logs, Dana's account, the brand partnership conversation, the bride's account of being contacted directly, and told me, in plain terms, that what Megan had done went well beyond a family dispute about credit and recognition. It constituted, in a legal sense, an attempt to interfere with my business relationships and potentially misrepresent her authority to bind the business to new arrangements, all without my knowledge or consent. The attorney recommended I send Megan a formal cease and desist letter, making clear in writing that she had no authority to represent Bloom and Bramble in any capacity going forward, and that any further attempts to contact vendors, clients, or partners on the business's behalf would result in legal action. I sat with that recommendation for several days before deciding to move forward with it. Sending a formal legal letter to my own sister felt like crossing some kind of threshold I couldn't fully take back, an acknowledgement that whatever relationship we'd had before this was now something I needed actual legal protection from, not just emotional distance. But when I thought about the bride who'd almost lost her wedding flowers to confusion she didn't create, when I thought about Dana's instinct to protect herself and the business relationship we'd built, when I thought about how many other conversations might have happened that I simply hadn't uncovered yet, I understood that protecting Bloom and Bramble required treating this with the seriousness it actually deserved, regardless of who was on the other end of the letter. The cease and desist was sent through my attorney's office on a Tuesday in late spring. I didn't see Megan's reaction directly, but my mother called me 2 days later, her voice tight with a kind of controlled distress I rarely heard from her. "She's devastated," my mother said. "She says you've destroyed her. She says you've turned this into something legal and permanent when it could have just stayed a family conflict." I understood intellectually why Megan might experience, but I also thought about the version of events where I hadn't reached out to my vendors and clients, where Megan had successfully repositioned herself with even one or two of them before I fully recovered and regained access to my own accounts. I thought about how close I'd come to losing not just temporary control of an Instagram account, but actual permanent relationships that had taken years to build. "I didn't destroy anything," I told my mother. "I protected something I spent 4 years building after discovering my sister tried to take pieces of it while I was too sick to stop her. Those are very different things." My mother didn't have a response to that. I haven't spoken to Megan directly since the cease and desist was sent. I know, through occasional updates from my mother, that she eventually found a job at a different floral business in the area, working for someone else, in a role that doesn't carry her name or her authority the way Bloom and Bramble briefly did during those 11 confused days. I have complicated feelings about that. Part of me hopes she's found a position where she feels genuinely valued, where the resentment that apparently built for so long beneath our working relationship has space to resolve itself in a healthier context. Another part of me, the more guarded part, the part that had to spend a full week confirming I hadn't lost vendors and clients to my own sister's quiet campaign of misrepresentation, finds it difficult to extend much generosity toward her. I think the truest thing I can say is this: I don't fully know how to reconcile the sister who sat by my hospital bed, who I genuinely believed was showing up for me during one of the most frightening experiences of my adult life, with the sister who was simultaneously using that same period of vulnerability to attempt a quiet, methodical takeover of everything I'd built. I don't think those two things cancel each other out. I think they coexisted somehow, in the same 9 days in the same person, and I am still working through what that means about who Megan actually is, underneath the resentment and the love that both seem to be genuinely present even as one of them drove her to do something I still struggle to fully understand. My business is secure now. Genuinely, thoroughly secure, in ways it had never been before this happened. I have legal protections in place I never thought I'd need. I have a clearer understanding of exactly who has access to what and why, and under what specific terms. What I don't have anymore is a sister I can call without calculating, somewhere in the back of my mind, what she might be doing with the information I share. That loss is harder to document than a changed password or a misdirected wholesale negotiation. There's no activity log for it, no timestamp, no clean piece of evidence I can point to and say, "Here exactly." It just did, slowly and then all at once during 9 days when I was too sick to see it happening, and too trusting even afterward to imagine how far it might have actually gone. I am 28 years old. My business is thriving. My follower count has recovered and grown beyond where it started. And I have learned, in the hardest possible way, that sometimes the people who show up for you in a hospital room and the people who would take everything from you while you're too weak to stop them are not, in fact, two different people at all. Sometimes they are exactly the same person, holding both truths at once, and you only find out which one wins when you're too vulnerable to see it coming.